I'm Andrea Chilcote, executive coach, lifelong leadership student, and author of What Leaders Need Now. Welcome to my leadership podcast. If you follow my podcast series, you know I've been talking to authors with extraordinary insights on leadership. Today's special guest has brought to life her experience in an unexpected way, one that might catch you off guard at first. Her book will draw you in, make you smile, and possibly even make you laugh out loud. And make no mistake, the insights are profound. Let me introduce you to Tanya Luna. Tanya Luna is author of Lead Together, Stop Squirreling Away Power, and Build a Better Team. She's an entrepreneur, psychology researcher, and writer. She's founded and grown multiple companies, including Scarlet Spark, a nonprofit that creates human-friendly workplaces for organizations that help animals. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on this podcast. And Life Labs Learning, one of the fastest growing leadership development companies in the world. Besides Lead Together, her other books include The Leader Lab and Surprise. She's also a TED speaker and lives in a micro sanctuary with 30 plus rescued animals and one human partner. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here.
I'm so delighted that you are. And I love the 30 plus rescued animals. When you have that many, you can never have a finite number. Isn't that true?
Well, and I was thinking, it's good that I said 30 plus because when you and I first started talking, it was 36 and currently it's 39. And I'm hoping that we stay under that 40 number so I don't have to change my bio. That's a really practical reason.
Yeah, because this will be outdated if that's
I can't do that to your podcast.
So you've written a brilliant story about a fellow named Sam Squirrel, and he's the branch manager of Nuts for You, Inc., and his company is facing an impending forest recession. And while it's a fictional tale, it's grounded in psychology and your applied expertise. Why did you choose to write a parable that teaches us a radical new way to lead?
Well, thank you. And I actually started writing Lead Together as kind of a more traditional nonfiction book. I had written two others that were kind of in that vein, and I like nonfiction books, but at that time I happened to be reading research on what method allows us to learn most effectively, keeps ideas sticky, and what allows us to be influenced to adjust our behavior. And there was just really clear evidence that our brains really like to learn through story. And so it was this curiosity about, is there a different, potentially even better way to learn, combined with the fact that in my experience, people so often see power as this kind of dirty word, as this uncomfortable subject. And so I thought, squirrels make people more comfortable. Squirrels tend to, at the very least, for whatever reason, squirrels make people laugh. I liked the metaphor of, kind of hoarding nuts. And we so often do that as leaders, especially when we get anxious or feel uncertain. And so it was this combination of how do I make the subject of power more comfortable, more accessible to talk about, even more playful, and then how can I help people learn through the power of story?
Beautiful. It's brilliant. It's so brilliant.
Thank you.
And so this radical new way, what is this radical new way of leading and using power? That's what I really want to dive into that.
Yes, of course. And, given the conversations I've heard you have with others and that you and I have had, I don't think that you're going to think that it's actually radical. It's more like common sense, but unfortunately not yet common practice. So the core of Lead Together is actually inspired by this concept by the scholar Mary Parker Follett. She made the distinction back in the 1940s about two different ways to use power. One is power over, the other is power with. Power over leadership is really what you think about if you look at a clip art of a leader, and it's usually some little dude on a podium telling people what to do. Power over is very much achieving results by using control. Power with is achieving results by using whatever power we have and actually sharing and distributing that power with others. And in that way, we're actually building our collective capacity to grow. One of the chipmunks in the book was inspired by another scholar named Alfie Cohen, and he says leadership should be something that's not done to you; it should be done with you. And so that's really the heart of it, is instead of using power as a means of control, of getting people to get things done, use whatever power we have, whether that's authority, knowledge, skills, relationships, share that with others. And in that way, we're expanding our collective power, our collective ability to achieve results.
There's so many things I want to ask you. One is, how did Mary Parker Follett get this idea back in 1941? So a woman, number one, in
Right.
1941, when this was unheard of.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my understanding is that she really became, I guess, radicalized in a way by becoming passionate about politics. She was looking at how is democracy practiced or not. And she was realizing that the place where democracy was most alive was in these kind of small local community spaces where people were actively participating in shaping where they lived and how they lived, and became really interested in how does that look in the workplace? How does that look in business? I don't know how she did it, frankly, because there she was presenting to hundreds of these like executives. I'm without a doubt, at least 99% of them were men.
Yeah.
But she was a scholar and a researcher, and just, I think, really spoke to not the touchy feely sides of wouldn't it be nice if we all worked together? Wouldn't it be nice if we were all collaborative? She was saying, look, you want results, you want engagement, you want commitment. And back then, there was this real sense that change is in the air, uncertainty is in the air. Now we feel it tenfold. But she really pointed out that you can't achieve success in a state in an environment of uncertainty by trying to control everyone's actions. You really have to
Yes.
like unleash, you would say, like the energy of the group. And
Yes.
then ultimately that's about still your profits and still your results. So I think that's, she was really taken seriously, and was quite influential in her time.
Well, that's the other thing I want to talk with you about too. The results piece of this and how it's done, because you've not only done it clearly as a consultant in your practice, and you've seen how this works, as I have over the years. And we go out there and so many people think they're doing it, or they think they're sharing power, or they say the right things, and really they're in hierarchical organizations with their ingrained philosophies. But you
Right.
did it in your own organization and you saw the
Mm.
power. So you were able to do it, run the experiment and see the results. Can you tell us
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And what was interesting was that I kind of lucked my way into this approach to leadership, and then learned about Mary Parker Follett deep into, let's say, the
Wow.
experiment, like 7 years into leading in this way. And it was so helpful because and I'm sure many listeners are also doing some version of this, right? Sharing powers on a spectrum. And I found it really helpful to put words to it and to kind of be able to talk about it with others in a more helpful, useful way. So I want to answer your question, but can I comment real quick on
Oh
something that
yeah.
you just said as
Yeah.
part of it? This point that you made about so many leaders want to do it or even think that they're doing it, sharing power or leading in really collaborative ways. I think that's such an important and insightful point, because one of the challenges that I often see working with organizations is that they one of the ways I talk about it in Lead Together is they almost have masked power. So they are holding on to their power. They are, really exerting their control, but they're trying to make it look like they're not. They're saying, "Oh, what is your? I do want to hear your perspective." So they do that step, but then they don't actually integrate that person's perspective. Or they say everyone's voice counts, but then they don't actually hear those voices. And so I think we are culturally like getting closer and closer and moving toward this way of being. But I would really encourage anyone to think about not just these values, but what do these behaviors look like in action?
Mhm.
How do we go that step further beyond just what we were taught around power?
And what do you think stands in the way of that? Is it what
Mm.
is it some kind of fear? Do they know they're not doing it? What That's what I examine as a coach. I'm always examining and what stops them from actually taking that idea and implementing it or trying it or taking the risk or listening.
Yeah.
What do you think gets in the way?
Um, well, I have thoughts on this. I'm really curious to hear your opinion as well, but I think the biggest is fear of giving up control. There's this sense that, especially for founders, especially for really high performing individuals, it's almost like you feel like you're jumping off a cliff. And the thing that's salient to people about sharing power isn't, oh, wow, I'm going to be able to get more done and people will grow and we're really going to get, creative and engaged and all this kind of stuff. The thing that starts to really stand out to them is, what if things go wrong? What if people make bad decisions? What if I look bad? What if my reputation is squandered? What if my profits doing, all this kind of stuff. So I, for people who struggle with that, I always encourage, shifting out of really focusing this idea of giving up control and more into thinking about how do we distribute control. We're not talking about creating chaos here. We're not talking about sacrificing quality. It's the exact opposite. How do I actually get out of this cycle of actually being trapped and not being able to produce and create more because I'm holding too tightly. So it's
Yes,
not about giving up control. It's about building more of that power for everyone.
yes,
What do
yes.
you think?
And
What's your diagnosis?
I think control is at the heart of so much, and it is even personality driven, and so many
Mhm.
people will even admit that it's a personality trait, it's a personality challenge
Mhm.
when confronted with it. And as you were talking, I was thinking about this other question I ask you, which is, how did you do it? And you ran the
Which I will answer,
experiment
I
and
promise.
no, I
Yeah.
know. No, I'm not pressing you for that. But maybe when faced with enough evidence, and I wonder if maybe that's part of it, that certainly we don't change just because somebody says, "Oh, look at the result you can get." That's not how human change happens,
Yeah.
but that is part of the equation.
Yeah, I think it's evidence from the outside and hopefully also evidence from the inside. So the people who have read the book or the people that I've consulted, the biggest changes they make aren't from reading the book itself. It's by going, well, let me try one of these things. Let me try two of these things. Oh, well, that was nice. I can, you know, someone on my team now can do more. I can go take vacation. Or someone
Mhm.
on my team is bringing me ideas I never even would have thought of. And it's that internal evidence that I think is really important. And to answer your question, that was really how I really lucked into this approach to building an organization. Um, just for context, I started it with my co-founder Leanne Renninger. It was the two of us. 8 years in, when I stepped out from my role and from the CEO role, and we sold the business, we were 150 people. We had an employee engagement score of 96%. In that time, we had 3 people leave, and 2 of them came back. So it was, I mean, so
Wow.
many other things were going for it, but I really credit this co-leadership approach to why we were able to be so resilient. We survived the pandemic. It ended up being our best year, even though it was really rough going for a while because we were doing leadership training and budgets were cut and all this kind of stuff happened. But so much of it was because we said, we want to distribute power. We don't want to have say over high stakes things just on our own. So high stakes decisions were always, people had veto power. Anyone in the organization who wanted to be involved with strategy could be. People hired their own department leaders. We had or even little things like our company meetings, the facilitator always rotated. So it's not to say that there weren't decision makers. It's not to say that everyone was involved in everything, but everyone had this sense of, I own this company and I'm a part of the mission,
Mhm.
the vision, the strategy.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it just got us through so much volatility and uncertainty because people spoke up and people rolled up their sleeves and got things done. And I think what you see in research on innovation about the value of diversity, it really only works if you put that diversity to work, and people have a voice and people have authority and decision making rights. So things like that. And a lot of it, I would say, came from the fact that both Leanne and I didn't have a business background. We have a psychology background. And so in some ways, we got really lucky because we weren't trying to replicate what we had seen in other businesses. We went into it thinking like scientists and thinking, well, we have a hypothesis, let's test it.
Uh-huh.
Or we need to collect data together. Or we don't know what we're doing. Hey, team, what do you think? Let's figure this thing out together. So I think that we were lucky in that sense because we almost got to start fresh because we were so naive in how a business should be led.
Wow. And so you've come out of that with some ideas. Um, I think they're beyond theories because you've proven them. But you talked to me a little bit about, and you write about this in the story in your book. You talked about you believe that the flaw is more about the system than the leader. You talked about magic math. Can you talk about some of those things with us here?
Magic math. Yeah. I mean, I think of power as kind of being magic math in that, if I had some cake and I shared it with you, I would have less cake. But if I have power and I share it with you, actually our collective power grows. Um, as a really simple example, if I'm just a founder and I'm trying to do everything on my own, I'm trying to hold on to all that power, I can only produce 10 widgets. Now I bring someone on my team and I say, hey, let's share the responsibility. Let me teach you what I know, you teach me what you know, and now we can make 30 widgets together. Um, and so, yeah, power is this really beautiful thing where you share it thoughtfully and it grows for others. Um, and, when it comes to thinking about um, how do we really use power well within an organization, yeah, I think it's very common for the conversation to be about the individual. Like, is this a power hungry individual or is this an empathetic individual? Is this someone who overtalks or is this someone who's collaborative? And
Yes.
while I think, of course, there are individual differences, in my experience, where I think we have much more exciting opportunity to shape the workplace is not in the individuals, but in the system. So, for example, what research shows is that when people feel that they have a high degree of power, they talk more, they interrupt more. When people feel a lower degree of power, it naturally switches on more of their empathy. So they start paying attention because now they're, dependent on others. So instead of saying things like, "Hey, you should be empathetic," "Hey, you should be, more thoughtful," what if instead we built systems that kind of nudged people into those behaviors naturally? And again, that could be something as simple as let's rotate who our facilitator is for every team meeting. It could be, I think an important one is no single person should ever make a high stakes decision alone. So firing decisions, hiring decisions, um, promotions. Ideally, those decisions are never made alone. At the very least, two decision makers and a tiebreaker. And it sounds kind of boring and like
Mm.
tactical, but what you find is, we go into organizations where they go, we want psychological safety. And they'll start talking about how to be nice to each other, how to listen to each other. And we're like, yes, all that is good. But before we can have psychological safety, how do we get structural safety? So, what are you doing to make people aware that it's actually our biases and our preferences aren't going to lead who gets hired, who gets promoted, who gets the best opportunities? Like, what systems are we putting to place to put some checks on power so it's well distributed? And what systems are we putting into place to grow everyone's power? So people are developing new skills, building new relationships, so they understand the strategy and the context so that they can fully contribute. So I often think about like, how do we grow that power? And at the same time, how do we make sure that it is not too concentrated in any one person or small group?
As you're talking, and even before this, as I was thinking about this conversation, I do a lot of work with people who have a desire to potentially share power with their teams, their collaborative leaders. But then when they get with their peer team, their I promote the idea of first team and team one, that say that peer team.
Yeah.
And they don't, that's a foreign concept to them. So they're, they operate in silos with amongst their peers, but with their own team, they tend to be, they share power, they listen to ideas. So, but then when it comes to, I'm holding on to my department, I protect my team. I hold that as
Right.
a badge that I support my team and I protect marketing or I protect the
Yeah.
salespeople.
Yeah,
And,
we call it
and yet,
turfing, protecting your
yes,
turf.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And this idea, and, of course, we talk about the magic math on teams and this it works this way too, and I'm just wondering how we apply this idea and all of these tools that you're talking about, the tactics apply the same way, and
Absolutely.
it's the same idea, and it's just one more
Yeah.
way, one more lens through which to look at sharing power, say on a peer team.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. I think people are already quite good at it and do it quite naturally in certain settings and in certain relationships. Yeah. I mean, I think, some of it has to do with what is the frame that teams are using within these organizations. Um, there's a lot of fascinating research that shows that as soon as you start thinking in terms of these little perfs, little teams, my team versus your team, it just bubbles up everything competitive and protective within us.
Yes, yes.
So some of the antidote to that is yes, we want those teams, but we also want to feel like those teams are a part of a larger whole. I sometimes use the metaphor of I want, if I'm going to feel like I really belong in a city, I want to know my neighbors, but I also want to feel like I know my neighborhood and I want to feel like, I'm connected to the city at large. So you need all of those things. So the team piece is important. So I think things like, number one, does everyone have a shared mission? Not a mission like a bunch of words and you're not even sure what they mean because it's a run-on sentence. But truly, do we understand what we're trying to achieve together? Do we understand how we're interdependent? Why we rely on each other to get that done? Um, some of that is just communication. Like when people join an organization or grow within that organization, are we constantly coming back to here's why we exist, here's why what we do matters, here's evidence that what we're doing makes a difference. um, and some of it is the way that work is getting done. So showing, for example, how 2 3 departments are actually reliant on each other and interdependent. And then I would say, aside from just the communication piece, it's also the relationship building. Like we're fairly straightforward animals. We need to have face time with each other to feel some degree of trust. In psychology, we call it the mere exposure effect. Merely being exposed to someone makes us like them more and trust them more. And so some of that silo stuff that happens is literally just because people aren't interacting with others in the organization, so they don't get the opportunity to form this sense of shared identity. So just 2 examples. It's constantly reconnecting to what's the thing that's shared, what are our shared mission, what are our shared goals, and then making sure that relationships are happening across the organization so that our identities don't become crystallized in this like it's me and marketing, but it's me as part of this larger organism.
And you did that. You had a thriving company during the pandemic. So how did you do the relationship piece during the pandemic?
Ooh, I would say
Successfully.
our relationship building grew during the pandemic in some ways because it was like, shared crisis. We were lucky in that it was already a distributed company. So we had 2 offices, one in New York, one in San Francisco, but we had lots of coworkers who were working in other cities. So we were already quite practiced in like Zoom meetings and Google Meets and that kind of stuff. So that helped. Although I will say this is so small, but so impactful. When we first tried to have virtual meetings, we would have like 2 giant groups on conference calls with their teeny tiny little faces, and you just saw a group on a computer and the other group saw another group on the computer. And so San Francisco and New York, even though we very much had a shared vision and mission, there was this sense of like us versus them starting to creep up. And a little change, we made other changes, but a little change we made was we started meeting where it's just one person per laptop. So everyone saw the same thing and everyone saw people's full faces. Um, and we would do a lot of breakout rooms. So, and then we did this into the pandemic and beyond. So yes, we're all, talking about something together as a group, but we're also going into small breakout rooms so that there's
Yeah.
a little bit of one-on-one conversation. There's a little bit of, groups of 3, groups of 4. And then because we have this shared power approach, everyone had authority to create experiences that were meaningful to people during that time, during like especially early times of the pandemic. Some people really wanted quiet co-working. So they launched this thing where, for like 3 hours a day, you could just log on and quietly co-work while having the camera on. Some people really wanted one-on-one time. So they launched this thing where they would get like lunchtime roulette and they would get randomly connected to someone to just chat. Every Friday, someone would organize a game. And so there's some virtual game like that. But then I think the deepest source of connection was that our work was just actually collaborative. So we designed our work wherever possible, even if it seemed a little inefficient at times, to be interdependent. Because we knew that, yes, in some cases it might be simpler to just have the one department take care of this, but then it's going to actually be harder in terms of execution because they're not getting input. And we often say don't try to get buy-in, get build-in. So they're not getting built-in ideas from others. They're not learning and sharing knowledge with others. So we really designed our work to be very interdisciplinary, and especially during the pandemic, even more so. So that was incredibly helpful.
You were thinking about it on every level throughout your work, throughout
Well,
that
what's nice is that
organization.
I was, but so was everyone else. And so
Yes.
I would never do quiet co-working. That sounds like a terrible idea. I would never have thought of that. I would not, we had, I live with a bunch of animals and no kids. I wouldn't have thought about the experience of parents. I wouldn't have thought about the experience of people living alone. And so I didn't have to have those insights because others on the team were able to step up and say, hey, these are these unique needs. Let's come up with different ways to support our team members who are experiencing these things.
Yeah.
So that's a beautiful thing about sharing powers. You actually don't have to think that much. It's great if you're on the
Yeah.
lazier side like I am.
That's awesome. So I want to go back to the book and make sure we capture just for people who are interested in reading your book. It highly recommend this. And if you've read other books that are written as parables, you have done an extraordinary job of detailing at the end of the chapters reflections. And they're not just check-in questions. Some of them are check-in questions, but you also have a section on power with planning. Um, you have an assessment, a list of tools and tactics. So this book is a powerhouse. It is not just a story. It is a story. It's a great story. You'll learn from the story. How do you recommend a leader use the book?
So thank you so much for saying that. It is really designed for different learning styles. So I've heard people say, I just read the story, that's all I wanted. I heard people say, I don't like the squirrel stuff, so I'm just going straight to the back of the book and I'm going to do the tools and I'm going to do the assessments. I personally recommend the story. But if I'm just thinking about it from a learning and development standpoint, um, one area of research that I've always been really interested in is the power of reflection. So there was a study that looked at surgical teams where in one condition they practiced more in surgery. In another condition, they had to pause and reflect on the experience they just had. And they found that these surgeons actually made faster progress in their skills if they built in time to reflect. So of course practice matters, but the reflection piece is essential, and it's almost like free because you've already done the work, you've already read it. Now really, cement that learning or let that learning take root by pausing. And that was the goal of the check-in questions, is to say, okay, just read the story. There were squirrels, there were puns. But now let me transfer this into my actual life. What, if anything, do I want to take away from this? How do I want to maybe reframe? And then comes the practice. So what specific steps do I want to take? What's a small experiment I might try? And I really do recommend for most people starting quite small. It could be something like you don't maybe you don't instantly involve everyone's strategic planning, but you say, this next project that I'm working on, how do I tackle this in a way where people are involved and fully participating? And let's see how that goes. And the book has lots of little tactics that help you take that overall strategy of sharing power and start to experiment with applying it and figure out what's right for you.
Great. Well, thank you for giving us that gift.
Thank you.
So I would also like to ask you about your latest endeavor, because it's something that's near and dear to my heart. As an animal advocate myself, I'm inspired by Scarlet Spark. And I also understand that 100% of the proceeds from your book go to that nonprofit. Can you tell us about Scarlet Spark?
Yes, thank you so much. So Scarlet Spark is a nonprofit that serves other nonprofits. So we like to say we help create human-friendly workplaces for organizations that help animals. And that's all over the map, from rescues and sanctuaries to organizations that are trying to improve animal cruelty laws, improve conditions for farm animals or end factory farming, things like that. And what's been amazing is getting a chance to apply my lessons learned from 8 years at my last organization, Life Labs Learning. We got a chance to study over 2,000 different organizations. And so here in this context, I could combine that knowledge, that expertise with my passion for animals and my deep compassion for the people who work so hard to help animals. I think you have some experience with that as well. Like this is hard work. It is heartbreaking work. These organizations are among the most under-resourced in nonprofits, especially when you look at farmed animals and wild animals. Almost no money goes there. And so these people have this deep passion. They're excellent at what they do in terms of trying to make a change, but they don't usually have experience or expertise in leading an organization. So our job is to be that spark that that sparks their full potential. I'm deeply, deeply grateful for getting a chance to support those individuals.
Thank you for doing that service that's so needed in the world.
Yeah, and I what's beautiful is the way that we think about our organization is, our goal is to make life better for all animals, humans included. And so much of the work within animal advocacy is interdisciplinary with the experiences of humans, whether that's health or justice or things like that. And so in some ways, this topic of sharing power, it takes on a whole new meaning when you look at our relationship to people and other species outside of just the workplace. It's, are we using what power we have to improve the flourishing for everyone else? Because what's beautiful is, if the flourishing of all those around us is elevated, then again, it's like that magic math of that's more individual flourishing for each of us.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's been wonderful having you here, getting to know you. Your teachings are timeless, and you're right. Sharing power. This is not restricted to what we traditionally think of as leadership in a corporate or organizational setting. So I love what you're doing with the animal welfare movement. This is your life mission. I can see.
Yeah, very much.
You can get Tanya's book, Lead Together, Stop Squirreling Away Power and Build a Better Team, on Amazon. You can see her TED Talks on TanyaLuna.com, TANIALUNA.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast by hitting the subscribe button below, or go to whatleadersneednow.com under the Thought Leadership section, where you can subscribe and also see our podcast library and my blog posts. Thank you for joining us today, and be well.